What's up, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this latest edition of the Frary Smith Podcast. It's Friday, February 2nd, and we've got an exciting episode 178 of the show on tap. We're going to be handing down our final verdicts for 2023. We're also going to be debuting our way too early power rankings for 2024. Caden, I got to admit, though, it's felt like a really long week for me. I know I'm traveling this weekend to call a couple of college basketball games. How about you? Got any big plans for the weekend?
Not too many major plans. Major plans as far as my own friend group. I'm taking my first golf lesson this weekend, which a lot of my friends will likely be excited about. So that was a good gift. Shout out to my mom for giving me that. I'm taking my first swing lesson. So we'll do that. Might catch a movie. My movie theater by me is playing some of the Oscar-nominated movies I missed this year. You know, I'm a big movie buff. So just a chill weekend, a little bit of golf, a little bit of movies. Definitely excited about it.
Well, and we haven't yet talked about it, but you got some sweet tickets on Wednesday night to go watch the Lakers play the Hawks. You got to see LeBron James in action. So you've already had a pretty good week.
Definitely a solid one. Got to shout out my boy Matt for that too. He gave me that opportunity on a silver platter, and I had to take advantage of it. I hadn't seen LeBron play since I was like a child, and I barely remember it. So definitely always great to see the King.
Yeah, I got to see him before he retires. So maybe when him and Bronny are playing on the same team, I'll try to make it out to a game. But
Right.
Before we go any farther, here's a quick plug for Wednesday's show. We wrapped up our In Review series where you and I spoke, with the radio voices for all 14 Sunbelt teams about the 2023 seasons for their squads. We spoke with the voice of the Ragin' Cajuns, Jay Walker. That was a great conversation, as well as the voice of the Warhawks, Mike Hammett. If you missed either of those episodes, definitely suggest going back and giving them a listen on Apple or Spotify. But Caden, listeners of this show, they know that I'm a sucker for a good series. And this was our second year doing our In Review series. Last year, we did it with the media members. That was a lot of fun. But this year was the radio voices. And I feel like, honestly, partner, we raised the bar a little bit here. And for me, just the depth of the knowledge and the passion that these radio voices had for each of their schools, it really showed through. And I felt like we learned a lot on talking to them in that series.
Yeah, we definitely learned so much, and the passion definitely stands out for me too. It's clear that these radio voices care about their program. A lot of them were tenured for a super long time and have seen generations of football at these different schools. And I think in an age where there's a lot of people talking about football, a lot of people having opinions, not always right opinions, a lot of guys who don't know ball. These guys that we talked to definitely know ball. So it was great hearing them talk on the surface level about the X's and O's, and also just pulling back the curtain and talking about some of those behind the scenes narratives we wouldn't have known about. So I think as far as the general scope we got from every single program and every single season that we had in the Sun Belt from all those teams, we couldn't ask for a better job from those radio voices than what we got.
Yeah, Kane, I think just to the interview that we did with JT Crabtree with South Alabama, we obviously saw the struggles that team had in terms of consistency on the field. And, he mentioned it was a leadership issue. And you say, well, there was a ton of returners. Well, not a lot of those returners had leadership experience in the past. So I thought that was kind of an interesting nugget, that without having boots on the ground and being amongst that team, you probably wouldn't have known. But Cato, we decided here as we get set to, wrap up this series that when you review some teams, the only, the best way to do it is then to hand down some final verdicts. And you and I had some fun, kind of divvying up some of these teams into some different categories. We looked at who was our most impressive team, who was that most disappointing team, Southern Miss. Make sure you don't watch that session of these final verdicts. And lastly, we looked at, who were the teams that, finished the best and who finished the worst. So, Kaden, let's jump in and start with most impressive. You and I went back and forth on picking teams, and our listeners aren't going to be surprised for who I took for most impressive. I went with the James Madison Dukes. This is a team that they go 11-2 in their second season at the FBS level. They started the season 10-0 before your boys from Boone dethroned them. They also got to host College Game Day and had the largest crowd ever. We heard Pat McAfee and Reese Davis talk about how great of an experience that was. And Caden, let's just be honest, with James Madison, we have witnessed one of the most successful FBS transitions over the last 2 years. So they had to be my most impressive team this year.
Definitely a great pick. No, you can't go wrong with the Dukes. But for my most impressive team, I had to go with this Troy team. I know from personal experience how hard it is to repeat as a champion, and the fact that this team was able to do it. They never had a doubt. We doubted them, but they definitely didn't doubt it in their own building. feel that when we were down there for the championship game. Coach Summerall absolutely doubled down on his culture from his first year. Gunnar Watson showed improvement. Kamani Vidal had a breakout year. Chris Lewis was shining at wide receiver, and Jabray Barber was 1 yard away from having a 1,000-yard season after being injured from the season before. So the offense took a huge leap we did not expect. And on the defensive side of the ball, we thought they'd take a step back without guys like Carlton Marshall, without Craig Slocum, KJ Roberts, and TJ Harris. Not a problem. This team found a way to maintain their standard on defense, if not be better, maybe holding teams to 17 points per game, around 300 yards again. This repeat championship run, I think, is why Troy had to be my most impressive team as far as superlatives go this year.
Let's be honest, Caden, you're always going to take a team that has a great defense, and Troy had a great defense this year. And like you said, that offense took a big step forward. For me, that's a good pick. I think that was, kind of who I would have expected you took there. Well, let's move on to our biggest surprise category here, Caden. I know you've got a team out of the Sun Belt West that you really enjoyed watching this year.
Yeah, biggest surprise has to go to Texas State. I mean, when you look at G.J. Kinney calling his shot, we didn't see it coming, but he called his shot this offseason. He got our attention through the transfer portal, kind of making himself that Deion Sanders of the portal, if you will, except for his team did a lot better than Colorado did. They went from 4-8 to an 8-5 season, a historic year, the best offense in the conference by far as yards per game, points per game. They get the big Power 5 win to start the season off against Baylor. I think this team just thoroughly impressed me, especially from the offensive standpoint. I think they have some improvement and some work to do on the defensive side of the ball, which we'll talk about later. But I was just thoroughly impressed with how this team was able to make a statement and kind of put the entire conference on notice this year. And I'm very excited to see what they do next year for sure. Definitely a huge shock, and definitely looking forward to not being shocked by them next year, hopefully.
Katie, the only thing I've got to say, I feel bad for first-year head coaches in the future, because there's going to become this expectation in college football of quick turnarounds when you look at what a G.J. Kinney did. And to some extent, like you said, at Colorado, obviously there was a turnaround from some of the low depths in that program. But Caden, I had to go with a team here that you and I spent the offseason last year kind of dunking on a little bit. We expected them to, finish 7th. There was questions on if they'd get 3 or 4 wins, and they end up making it to a bowl game and narrowly losing. So for me, Old Dominion was my most surprising team. As I mentioned, they were picked to finish last in that preseason polling. They had a new offensive system that they were going to be putting in place under Kevin Decker. And Caden, they had a quarterback that I think, if I remember right, had thrown like 14 passes in his career before the year. And honestly, they proved us completely wrong. You're going to remember this. Go ahead and plug your ears. But they did beat App State this year, and who obviously went on to play for that Sun Belt title game. They played JMU to a 1-score game. And Caden, they made a bowl game, after winning 2 straight to end the year. It was probably one of the more exciting things that happened in the league, beating Georgia State and Georgia Southern down the stretch. And Caden, the turnaround was surprising for me, and they were just a ton of fun to watch this year. They were always in these close games, and for me, that made Old Dominion must-watch television all year. So I think that was, befitting of a biggest surprise. But moving on to our most disappointing, Caden, and this was a category that, you hate to get into, but, for me, Marshall was the most disappointing team in the Sun Belt this year, and my reason for that is that was a Marshall team that, honestly, when you and I talked in the preseason, we had, them kind of labeled as a dark horse in that Sun Belt East heading into the year. And, they get off to that great start, but then, they looked horrible down the stretch. And, the offense looked dreadful at times. Ali was still good. He put up some numbers, but Cam Fancher and really their inability to kind of throw that ball downfield was a major disappointment. I know the fans didn't necessarily enjoy watching their style of football. And Caden, one of the things we did learn and we knew already was that defense dealt with a lot of injuries, but it clearly showed that there just wasn't enough depth. So for me, that Marshall team was a major disappointment in 2023.
Definitely a major disappointment, no, especially for me. This is the team I picked to come out of the East because I thought they'd be good at all the things you kind of just mapped out that they weren't good at. And for the team that I'm picking for my most disappointed team, it's the team that I picked to come out of the West that let me down, and it's South Alabama. This is the team, like I said, that I picked to come out of the West in back-to-back seasons. They went from a 10-win season to a 7-win season, which might not seem like worthy of earning the most disappointed award for this conference right now. But I think when you looked at how they absolutely reloaded and how they were primed to double down on that success from 2022, they just weren't able to do it. And we talked about it with JT Crabtree. It was the injuries and the inconsistency of this team. We talked about how this team needed to rise to the occasion and win big games, and they weren't able to do that last year. You looked at what they were doing against Oklahoma State. That's the peak of what they were able to do this year. That's the only team they ended up beating last season that had a winning season. They took care of business against all the teams in the conference they were supposed to, but when it came down to winning those big games, playing good against a James Madison, a Troy, a Tulane to start the year, they weren't able to do it. And as a result, this is a team that only got 7 wins. And when you have to give out an honorable mention, sometimes you got to do it. And I have to give that to Southern Miss for the year they had. We didn't necessarily have sky-high expectations for this team, but their fan base surely did. They had 7 straight losses, and I definitely think that's worthy of getting an honorable mention in this category. I wasn't necessarily buying into some of the quarterback hype that was surrounding this program heading into the season. I'm not going to give myself an award for forecasting that or anything like that, but I think I liked what I saw at the end of the season for this team as far as the spark winning 2 games in conference play. But I think as far as a fan base perspective and the expectations in Hattiesburg, I would have to honorably mention Southern Miss for not necessarily meeting their standards and what they wanted to do last season.
Yeah, Caden, I think that's fair when it comes to Southern Miss. We heard all offseason about how good that football team was going to be. And honestly, if they had stayed healthy, I think they would have been a better football team. But clearly that offense underperformed. Frank Gore Jr. wasn't at his best at the beginning of the year. So I think that's fair to label them an honorable mention. It's going to be interesting to kind of see how you feel about them, heading into 2024 in a couple of minutes. But Caden, this was a fun category too, and I'm going to have you go up again. Most resilient team in the league. Who was that for you?
Yeah, for me, Coastal Carolina absolutely runs away with this one for me. I think Tim Beck absolutely impressed me this year with what he was able to do with kind of the bad hand he was dealt this year. If you would have told me that arguably the best quarterback in conference history, Grayson McCall quarterback, was going to miss 5 games, get hurt and miss the last 5 games of the season and a bowl game, I would not believe that this team was going to finish with an 8-5 record, especially starting off conference play 0-2 in back-to-back games in the East. We talked at length about how impressive that 5-0 stretch was with 3 different quarterbacks, 3 different play styles. The defense stepped up big, which was huge. We saw them kind of have to change their style and the way they win, kind of like the Kansas City Chiefs who we're about to see in the Super Bowl, who kind of had to change their offensive style and rely on their defense to get a championship run. Some successful quarterback play and successful defensive play took them to the heights they're at now. It was the same thing for this Coastal Carolina team, having to feed their running backs as well. So they just thoroughly impressed me, I think, as far as how resilient they were and what they were able to do. And have to give another honorable mention out here, kind of in the same token when you talk about what Louisiana had to do this year. This is another team that had to start 3 different quarterbacks this year. And for them, it was really a little bit more of an emotional roller coaster. You have to imagine starting the season with Ben Woodridge, then getting just this emotional lift from a young quarterback in Zion Chris, who was able to take this team to new heights, had them thinking that everything was going to be great for the remainder of the season. Then he has the devastating injury. You have to go back to another veteran. So I think as far as this team being able to make a bowl game yet again for being dealt another bad hand in back-to-back years against Coach Desormeaux, you have to be impressed with them. We talked about it with Jay Walker. This team's had back-to-back seasons where things have not gone their way, but the fact that they were able to make back-to-back bowl games, and they might have disappointed in those games, but still getting to that kind of 500 mark, that 6-win mark, and making that bowl is something I think to celebrate. So I had to give them an honorable mention here as well for their resiliency.
Yeah, I think those are 2 very interesting teams. Obviously it's tough when you lose your leader, your quarterback one, and both of those teams went pretty deep down the depth chart. I think to your point about Coastal Carolina, maybe the biggest difference between them, getting, even further on is maybe if Taylor Swift had started dating, one of their players to go along with the Chiefs reference there. But Caden, for me, most resilient here, it had to be Arkansas State, and look no further than a 73-0 loss to start the year to Oklahoma. Jalen Rayner, then he ends up, getting that starting job in week 3 and goes on to put together a Sun Belt Conference freshman of the year type season. This team was in every game the rest of the way, except for the game against Troy. That one, they were never really close. But then, Caden, how great of a way to end a season by, picking up 77 points in week 12. And they probably should have won their bowl game. Let's be honest. That was not an offsides call. So for me, this is an Arkansas State team that they went through a lot of adversity this year, and to put together the year that they did, to me, is very deserving of the most resilient team in the conference. And I know this is a team in Arkansas State that you and I are both high on as we look ahead to 2024. But last category, best in-season turnaround, worst in-season collapse. And Caden, I'm going to go ahead and go first here, and it's time to dump on a couple of teams from Georgia Southern, and shout out, honorable mention, Georgia State for having the worst in-season collapse. They both started the season a combined 12-3, but then Caden, down the stretch of the season, they go a combined 1-10, and that only win was a Georgia State win in the bowl game over Utah State out in Idaho. These two teams, honestly, we both thought midway through the season were legit title hopefuls. Georgia Southern kind of got, a slight leg up there on Georgia State with that midweek win. But these teams, finished extremely poorly, and they made this an easy pick for me in terms of worst in-season collapse this year in the Sun Belt.
Yeah, as a Georgia boy, that hurts me a little bit, not as much for an App State guy who's seeing Georgia Southern be on the losing end and getting that award. But when it comes to the team that had the best in-season turnaround, I mean, how could you not go with App State? I mean, come on, this team started off the year. This team started off the year 3-4, following a 6-6 season that was historically bad. I mean, if you just take a record standpoint, this is the definition of being with your back against the wall. But then when you take the championship expectations that come with this program and the outside noise and hearing about your head coach having to be in the hot seat and every single week having that happen on social media, it's a tough position to be in. But then when you have those losses specifically be a 6-point overtime loss to North Carolina, 3-point Wyoming loss, 3-point Coastal Carolina loss, losing in heartbreaking fashion to Old Dominion, yet you're still able to stay the course and improve throughout the season and go on that incredible run to end the season going 5-0 all the way back to a championship appearance. You have to just take your hat off to this App State team for showing resilience. You can't say every team in the country, given those expectations and given the start they had to this year and the year they had the year before, being able to go on a run like that. As soon as Halloween hit, Joey Aguilar turned into the scariest quarterback maybe in the country, went on an absolute heater in the month of November. We always talk about they remember November and Boone. They definitely remember the last one we had a lot of fans turning back, cooling down the hot seat of Coach Clark a little bit after kind of lighting it on fire to start the year. So you have to take your hat off to this App State team for having one of the most impressive in-season turnarounds I think I've seen since I've been playing football. That's for sure.
Okay, and let's be honest, outside of LeBron James's pregame routine, that might have been the second most chalk that I've seen this week. But we promised the fans in this episode a way too early power rankings, Caden, and this is always a futile opportunity here. We're sitting in February, and we're trying to tell you how we think teams are going to play out in the fall. But why not? It's the off season. We've got some time, so let's jump into it. And Caden, I think the best way to do this is we don't want to reveal our top teams right away. So let's go 7 through 3. I'll let you go first. I'll come back, and then we'll get into our top 3 teams as well.
Yeah, we'll start in the East, and I'm going with my 7th spot. The last projected way too early pick is Georgia State. I mean, I think this team had way too many losses. You look at what they're losing in the transfer portal and just with their seniors in general, and you could argue that no team in the conference is maybe losing more of their production. I mean, you can't discount losing a guy like Darren Granger, who we've talking highly about, Marcus Carroll, Robert Lewis, John Trey Hunter, Brykees Brown, losing a ton of offensive linemen as well. I think when you look at the production this team had last year, all of it's gone. And when you compare that with what this team did at the end of the season, just kind of falling apart and collapsing, really has me worried about not just their team in general, but the culture overall, as far as being a stepping stone program, having players leave through the portal, and just the disappointing finish to last season. You saw kind of that high ceiling to start the year. And even in that moment, if you look at this team and their hot start to the year, a lot of the reasons why they were so hot and why they were so good to start the season are gone now. So they're at the bottom for me. For Georgia Southern, they're coming in the number 6 spot for me. I think J.C. French will do well in this offense. I think he's going to add an element with his legs that's going to be a new dynamic, which I really am excited to see paired with Jalen White coming out of the backfield. But I think you also have to look at the defensive side of the ball, and you can say they improved, but I just cannot overreact to them going from giving up 32 points per game to 29 points per game. I think it's going to be huge getting Marquise Watts and Trent back. I think Brandon Bailey at the helm is going to help this defense improve again, but you're looking at a unit that gave up over 40 points in 3 of their last 5 games, including a 38-point loss to Marshall to end the season. And I just worry about this defense as a whole and kind of their formula overall. And speaking of Marshall, they're who's coming in for the 5 spot for me. 15 portal additions is huge, 8 of them from the Power 5. They have to reestablish a new offensive culture, but I think Coach Huff has a really good culture in place outside of the X's and O's. I think they're going to be able to lean on that this entire offseason. It's going to be more so a question about how that new offense looks, how the defense gels after losing a ton of good players and a ton of good leadership. You talk about guys like Owen Porter, a Micah Abraham, Alston going into the transfer portal as well, Eli Neal at linebacker being gone. This is a team that lost a lot of key players. I think Coach Huff is going to keep the culture intact, but they're going to have to ask for a lot of new fresh faces to do well and have to kind of reestablish their defensive culture and put in an entirely new offense. But I think they do have some transfer portal pieces that are very exciting, and probably for the most hottest take on this podcast episode.
Don't do it.
For who's coming at my number 4 spot, I have to go with James Madison, Noah.
Wow.
Listen, you have to take the logos off of the helmet sometimes. And I think when you really look at this James Madison team and what they lost from a coach and roster standpoint, I just cannot put them ahead of the teams that I have ahead of them. The most important parts of this team's infrastructure and success the last 2 seasons are gone. Kirk Signetti is gone. Offensive coordinator Mike Shanahan and the passing game coordinator Tino Sinceri is gone. And that's who Jordan McLeod and Todd Centeio spoke very highly about and attribute their success to. And they are gone. You can't discount the fact that those 2 players were players of the year in this conference. And I think having to maintain that standard is going to be tough. And when we talked about James Madison last season, the last 2 years, as far as why they were so good, it's the quarterback position and the defensive line position. And guess who's also gone for this team, Noah? This entire defensive line that was nationally ranked, and Pat Kuntz, who the defensive lineman, we had 2 on the show, talked about how important he was to their success. That is all gone now. So I think when you look at this team's formula for winning, their infrastructure, that is all gone now. And I'm just this early into the offseason having to bet on some teams that are ahead of them that have some more consistencies in that area versus a James Madison team. I think when you look at the legacy and the success this team has had the last couple of years, you can use that as a reason to pick them this early in the offseason. But I think App State taught us last year the culture and the success and expectations can only take you so far with them going 6-6 last year. So from my perspective right now and what I know about James Madison and what's going on in that building and what they've lost, I just have to see them taking a little bit of a step back. And I just cannot overlook how elite the quarterback play, the defensive line play was for this team, and not all being gone from a coordinator and player standpoint. So those are my 4 through 7 in the East as we sit in the month of February, very, very far from the season.
Well, I can tell JMU Duke fans one thing, you're going to like Noah Frary a lot better than you like Caden Smith. And I believe I've got the stats to back it up that says JMU's going to have another good season. But, partner, we agree on Georgia State. That's a lot of star power to lose. Granger, Carroll, Lewis, Hunter, just to name, a few. And honestly, when I started looking at the schedule, it's ridiculous. You've got road games at App. You've got a road game at JMU, Marshall, Georgia Tech. And you get 2 possible West challengers in Arkansas State and Texas State as your crossover matchups. For me, I'm going to go ahead and say it. I think it's going to be hard for Georgia State to get to a bowl game this year, given the schedule. But if there was, a glimmer of hope, we saw Coach Elliott and this staff reload last year, and they've already brought in some nice pieces out of the transfer portal. So could they do it again? We'll see. But I'm not betting on it here at the beginning of February. For me, me and you have Marshall and Georgia Southern flip-flopped. I've got Marshall at number 6. I think I'm excited to see this new offense, but we're also going to have quite the quarterback competition going on. You're not going to have Rasheen Ali. And, when you're bringing in a new offense partner, you just don't know how things are going to gel. Like I said, I think G.J. Kinney set the bar pretty high, but those expectations aren't always realistic. One silver lining for Marshall, I do like their home schedule this year, and they're over 600 in terms of winning percentage at home under Coach Huff. So I think that gives me enough hope that despite some of the other challenges, that there's a real chance that this team's going to a bowl game in 2024. Georgia Southern, I've got them at number 5, Caden. And for me, the big reason why, they're bringing back some nice weapons. I love Jalen White. I love Derwin Burgess. I think they're 2 of the more exciting players in the Sun Belt Conference. Like you said, though, is J.C. French the guy? I think we don't know the answer to that. And, one of the things that Danny Reed mentioned, too, that offensive line's got to be rebuilt if they want to be successful. I do expect to continue to see some more defensive improvement. Obviously, they switched the system up. You bring in a new DC this year. You brought in a lot of new pieces. I think a second recruiting cycle is really going to help Georgia Southern out in that depth factory. But, for me, the biggest thing that's got to change for Georgia Southern, for me to even consider them as a contender in the future, they've got to start winning in November. They're 1-9 in 2 seasons under Clay Helton in the month of November. That's got to change. And Kane, the only win that they had, go ahead and plug your ears again here. That was the double overtime game in 2022 versus App State that kept App State out of a bowl game. But they need to go 3-1 in a tough non-conference that includes games against Boise State and others. So it's not going to be easy for Georgia Southern. Caden, here's where we start to differ a little bit. I went with another team from the state of Virginia at number 4, and it was Old Dominion. And for me, this is a compliment to see them this high. I was tempted, honestly, to put them higher. They've got their starting quarterback coming back. You've got another year in this offense. And I started looking at that running back depth chart. They're bringing back pretty much everyone except, for their leading running back, Kadarius Callaway. They're bringing back their top 3 wide receivers, and that's just on offense. And you mentioned it on defense, or you haven't yet because you've got them ranked a little bit higher. But, particularly in the secondary, they were hit pretty hard. You do have Jason Henderson back, but I think there's some questions defensively. And Caden, again, Old Dominion's a team. They played in 11 one-score games a season ago. They go 6-5. If you turn a couple of those around, and suddenly you're in the title hunt in this conference. So that's how I'm going. I think we're pretty much on the same page here. I'm interested to kind of break into these top 3s now.
Yeah, you mentioned it, and you gave me a perfect cue up for my number 3 seed. I'm calling my shot right now, and give me the Monarchs. This is a team that's going to be a championship contender next year. You mentioned those 11 close games. You turn those 11 close games into wins, and we're talking about this team a lot differently, and I'm not afraid to start talking about this team differently right now. I think when you look at an offseason, them improving, that's going to be their motivation all offseason, those close losses, how close they were to getting to the mountaintop. So give me the Monarchs as the 3. I think the returning quarterback, Grant Wilson, who we're both high on. We saw that he can do it with his arm and his legs, and I expect him to take another leap and be even better next year in another season, in an off season, in this offensive system that's extremely quarterback and extremely skill player friendly. You mentioned the running backs returning. Kadarius Callaway, I believe, is in the transfer portal after averaging 7 yards a carry, but Keyshawn Wixon's back. He had 5 yards to carry. Every player in the running back room last year had their best season yet as far as their touches and what they were able to do in this offense. And I think it's because they have those light boxes, they'll be able to operate. And I think the receivers are going to be able to operate as well. You mentioned how many receivers they're bringing back from that room. These wideouts are going to have explosive plays and one-on-one coverage. Their 2 top guys had 17 yards of pop last year. This defense, like I said, the year before was underrated because of how much of a disservice their offense was. Now they got a little bit more offensive help. You see them get into the top 5 in scoring. Jason Henderson's back for his last season. I think this team's going to really rally around him and his leadership, especially. I think he's going to be fearless. I think he's going to be getting after it this offseason. And I think the mantra, like I mentioned before, is going to be turning those close losses into wins. They beat App State, improved themselves, knocking on the door of a team that was in the championship, a 4-point loss to Coastal and a 3-point loss to James Madison. If they win those 2 games, we're talking about this team a lot differently. So book it right now. I'm going to start talking differently about them right now, like I mentioned. So give me them as my 3. Number 2, I'm going with Coastal Carolina. Like I talked about before, as far as the resilience before with the superlatives, Tim Beck absolutely impressed me this season. And I think he's going to be even more impressive this offseason. If he was able to get 8 wins with 3 different quarterbacks, imagine what he can do with an entire offseason, being able to evaluate that quarterback room and really build a proper attack for whoever is the starter. You lose some weapons, obviously, at wide receiver. You cannot replace Jared Brown, a friend of the podcast that we had as well, and Jared Pinkney. And I think what you saw from Ethan Vasco improving throughout the season, I think if he is the starter, he will be one of the premier dual threats in this conference. He's a big body. I love how he runs, and he really showed off his arm and his passing ability as well in that bowl game. And I really like him, especially if he's the starter next year. But I think even with a guy like Noah Kim, a talented transfer from Michigan State, a Big Ten program, I think this quarterback room is just going to brew some good competition. They're going to get the most out of that room. And we talked about it before with the resilience. The reason why this team was able to be so successful was the improvement in the defense under Craig Nyvar. I honestly think his defensive personnel was a little bit less talented than it was than before he arrived. And the fact that he was able to get that out of them, I think they're going to double down on it this year. JT Killen and some other guys are big losses, but I think he proved that he's a coordinator on the defensive side of the ball to be reckoned with as far as what he was able to do in his first season at Coastal Carolina. And with the top seed, you have to pick App State. I mean, I think this is a team that's absolutely reloaded on offense. They have the best quarterback in the conference returning. They have all the wide receivers back except for Deshaun Davis. You get another year of Caden Robinson. You get Christian Horn coming back, which is huge for this team. very underrated as far as him coming back as one of the top wide receivers in the conference. And you have plenty of other pieces on the offensive side to work with. Kanye Roberts, I think, is going to be primed for an excellent breakout year. The offensive line had to replace their tackles last year, but this year they have to replace their interior. So I feel like that's the only question mark to really have to answer on that side of the ball. And I think on the defensive side of the ball, they proved last year they can prove and adapt throughout the season. And I think they'll be able to do that again this offseason, figuring out where their personnel matched best, being able to show off that IQ that they were able to do, kind of adjusting on the fly all the way into their championship run. Give this unit a full season back with some linebackers that were very young last year, a defensive line that was very young last year. They'll come back with the extra swagger. And I think the biggest thing for this program is just the continuity of the coordinator positions. You talk about Coach Sloan coming back, Scott Sloan, the defensive coordinator, another year in his system, Frank Ponce, another year in his system. That's something you don't see a lot of App State, especially given a season where you make the championship game. So I think just given the personnel, the cachet of this program and what they return from a roster and a coach standpoint, hard not to pick the Mountaineers as the top seed going into the East next season.
Okay, and all I got to say is it's crazy the difference one off season makes. I mean, we were sitting here at this time last year. You were not very high on your boys from Boone, and suddenly after a year that they lose in the Sun Belt Championship game, you're ready to talk about them all off season long. So that's an interesting pick here in February. Caden, for me, top three look something like this. Checking in at number 3 was Coastal Carolina, and you mentioned it, and I'll say it as well. I've got a lot of faith in Tim Beck. He won 8 games despite having 3 different quarterbacks. That says a lot about a head coach, particularly someone who didn't have any head coaching experience ahead of this job. But Caden, you also mentioned the quarterback options, and I think that has me, really excited for this Coastal Carolina team. Ethan Vasco was excellent down the stretch. He was fantastic in that bowl game. You mentioned Noah Kim, the former Michigan State starter. You've even got Blake Boda, who we saw a little bit this year. They're going to find a quality quarterback out of that room, and the one thing that I know about Tim Beck is he knows how to build quality quarterbacks. Obviously, you can look at the track record going back to names like Joe Burrow, but the defense was good this year for me for Coastal Carolina. I think they've proven that they can bring in some Power 5 level bodies into that program, and I'm expecting to see Tim Beck and staff do something very similar here in the offseason. They're going to continue to bring in those guys, and honestly, I'm not expecting much of a drop-off defensively for this team. Caden, I'll be honest, though, I couldn't put them any higher because this is a team that lost to JMU by a combined 82 points in the last 2 years, and until they can prove that they can play with the big boys, a team like James Madison, it's hard for me to put them ahead. And that's the perfect segue into my number 2 team. And Caden, you took the Dukes at number 4. I think you're crazy, and here's why. For me, this is a little bit of a legacy pick. You look at this JMU team. They've not had a losing season in over 20 years. Their last losing season was back in 2002, and I'm not expecting one this year despite the number of losses. I dug a little bit deeper. 8 or more wins in 9 of the last 10 years. They went 7-1 in that COVID year, or else they would have had 8 or more wins in 10 consecutive seasons. The standard is winning at James Madison, and I'm expecting them to do more of that this year. Couple other things here. For me, Caden, every time you look at programs, money talks. You've got to look at the money, and by far and away, James Madison has the biggest athletic budget. Money, equals success in college football, unless, let's be honest, you're Auburn or Texas A&M. They seem to throw money around year in and year out. But at the G5 level, that point largely stands firm, and it's a big reason why I don't think we're going to see this big drop-off. We are seeing a lot of losses. You mentioned, a lot of the guys on offense, but you also that defensive line, you're losing everyone. Can they restock? I think that's a big question for Bob Chesney and this staff. And Caden, here's the stat that sealed it for me. We've talked about Jeff Bourne's influence on this James Madison athletic department. He hires Bob Chesney away from a very successful Holy Cross program. Caden, new hires under Jeff Bourne as head football coaches. We're talking about Everett Withers. We're talking about Houston. We're talking about Signetti, a combined 37-7 in their first years at JMU. So he's assembled a great coaching staff, and I'm not betting against the James Madison Dukes having another good season here despite some of their losses. And Caden, much like you, I'm going App State at the top. They're returning Joey Aguilar, the Sun Belt Newcomer of the Year. Behind McLeod, I think he was the league's best quarterback, and he brings, his top weapon back in Caden Robinson. They've got a lot of momentum, unlike, going into this past year. They were 6-1 in their final 7 games, including that bowl win. You mentioned the continuity on staff. I think that's going to be huge. And for me, the biggest thing holding App State back potentially, they are playing a gauntlet of a schedule. You got to go on the road to Marshall, on the road to Georgia Southern, on the road to Coastal Carolina. You've got Liberty and Clemson in your non-conference. Plus, you get South Alabama and a trip to Louisiana in Lafayette as your crossover. So things not going to be easy there for the Mountaineers. So, Caden, I think, for the most part, we're kind of on the same page here. I think we agree at the top. James Madison seemed to be the biggest difference between you and I.
Yeah, no, I just feel like a lot of the reasons why you pick James Madison are things in the past, things of James Madison's legacy. I think when you look at a program like Alabama this year, I don't think Alabama is going to be picked to win the SEC just because Nick Saban won championships for them in the past. I think it should be even more accentuated for a James Madison team, who a lot of the statistics you were using were from their FCS playing days. I think money does win games, but I ultimately think when you look at on the field for this team, the players, the coaches that were there last year and the year before that breeded success, that's not there for them anymore. I just think James Madison has to prove it. I don't think they're going to take a tremendous step back. I do not think James Madison is going to have a losing season by any means, but I do think as far as what they were able to do last year, their recipe for success is fully gone. They have completely new staffs in the kitchen, you could say. And I think they just have to prove it to me a little bit more compared to other teams who look at their personnel, look at their coaching staffs and what they have ahead of them. They have proven it to me more last year versus what the James Madison team doesn't have coming into this season. So I definitely see what you're saying. I think if James Madison does do what they did the last couple of years, it won't be surprising. But I think from my perspective, it'll be a little bit more surprising just given how successful they've been and how much of that success is now out the door.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think agree to disagree here early on in the offseason, but that's what makes these fun. Okay, let's move on quickly to the Sun Belt West here, and I'll go ahead and go first here. 7 through 4, I had to put ULM in the basement. I mean, they at this point they don't deserve to be any higher. I am excited about the Bryant Vincent hire in this new era. This is a team that was very competitive, as Mike Hammett told us when we talked to him on Wednesday's episode. They played tight games against App State, Georgia Southern, and Texas State. They couldn't win any of those. Had they won one of those, maybe it changed their season. But for now, ULM is in the bottom. Caden, this next one up, Southern Miss fans in Hattiesburg are not going to like it. I labeled them our most disappointing team, and, I think that was fair. We thought last year they could win 8 games. They finished 3-9. I think we drank too much of the Kool-Aid in the offseason. Maybe we listened to too much on Twitter at times, but I'm not doing that this year. I think they're going to be better than 3-9, but I don't see this team making a massive leap into championship contention. We've said all along they're a quarterback away. I do think there are some nice pieces there. Ethan Crawford, Tate Rodemaker, John White. I think this is probably the most exciting quarterback room that Will Hall's had in his tenure. So, if he finds a quarterback, maybe they can leap up these rankings. Again, challenging schedule for them. They start the year at Kentucky. They've got a road game against Jacksonville State, who was really good in their first year in Conference USA. They draw Marshall and JMU away, and then you got to play Troy and Texas State, who I think are both better than them on the road. There just aren't a lot of guaranteed wins right now for Southern Miss. Louisiana, I think the reason I've got them at number 5 is they've got a pretty low ceiling at quarterback, in my opinion. Zion Chris, if he was back, I'd have this team 2 to 3 spots higher. Fields and Wooldridge, though, they just, for me, don't have a ton of upside. Louisiana has kind of struggled to stay healthy, 3 quarterbacks in each of the last 2 seasons. And there's questions, at quarterback. It just doesn't really allow me to go much higher. I do think the defense is going to be really good. Again, they had a lot of guys get seasoning this year. I think this is a top 5 unit once again. So if the offense can catch up, maybe they get into contention. Last year, Louisiana had the easiest schedule, or one of the easiest schedules in all of FBS. We can't forget Liberty, and somehow they ended up playing in a New Year's Six Bowl. But they've got Tulane in week 3. When you're talking about Louisiana, they've got Wake Forest in week 4. You've got to go to Coastal Carolina. You've got App coming home. So can they win tight games? And so far, the answer has been no under Mike Desormeaux. So that's got to change. If it does, maybe Louisiana jumps a little bit higher. Caden, this is where I went off the rails. And honestly, I would have had Texas State a lot higher. I've got them at number 4. If it wasn't for all this drama going on down in San Marcos right now, I had them as my number 1 team heading into, the offseason. But then you bring in Delora, Finley leaves. It seems like some people maybe got a little bit greedy down there. And now without a clear-cut quarterback 1 in early February, I'm concerned. They did grab Finley late last year. Hey, maybe Jordan McLeod is still in the transfer portal. Maybe they go get him. That'd be interesting. But The one thing that I love about Texas State, I think they've got the two best offensive pieces in the conference back in Ismail Mahdi and Joey Hobart. I think you could make the argument that they're RB1 and wide receiver one right now. So despite that lack of the quarterback, I think the offense is still going to be good. And Caden, G.J. Kinney's a game changer. His ability to recruit in the transfer portal and the high school ranks, he turned this program around in year one. And for me, I sit here and say, what could he do with a second recruiting class? So that's why I've got Texas State sitting at number 4 right now.
Definitely a solid list, Noah. Again, we have some disagreement, so this one will be a little bit more fun. I think even more fun than it was when we disagreed a little bit on the East. I'll make the first two quick because we have the same number 7 and the number 6. ULM had to put them at the bottom. Obviously, Bryant Vincent era is going to begin, and I think just given what they did last year and not being able to win a single conference game, I am excited about this program. I think there's going to be a ton of competition in the offseason. We talked on the previously about this team and how they were able to be more competitive in the last couple seasons. I do think they will be more competitive. I think they have great leadership with Aiden Huntington on the defensive side of the ball, but I ultimately think this team is going to finish in the bottom again. But I do think they will be more competitive this season. Same thing with Southern Miss. You talked about the quarterback away mantra for this team. I am very excited about this quarterback room. It has more potential, I think, than ever. I like the cachet of Tater Rodemaker coming as a high recruit, a guy who's been at Florida State. I love what we saw with Ethan Crawford last year with his legs, but you don't have the legs of Frank Gore Jr. again this season. I think this defense will get back to their standard. They were absolutely decimated last year, and I think they will be in a better spot next year. I think they will be more competitive. They'll get more wins, but I ultimately think they're going to be in the bottom of the conference again this early in the offseason. This is where we start going a little bit different, Noah. And if anyone listens to this podcast and knows how I feel about this team, it truly breaks my heart to put them this low. But at number 5, I just have to put South Alabama. I cannot overreact to Gio Lopez having a great game against a terrible Eastern Michigan team in a bowl game that did not beat a single winning team last year. We talk about the success of this team the last couple of years. Carter Bradley was a key to that success. LaDamian Webb was a key to that success. Those guys are gone. We talked with JT Crabtree about how much Carter means to this program. He is now gone. I think Major Applewhite is an excellent play caller, will be a great head coach for the squad. I'm not worried about the offense. I'm very excited about pieces like Braylon McReynolds, like a Jamal Pritchett. But I think when you look at this team on the defensive side of the ball, that's where I'm the most uneasy, and that's where I worry the most. You lose your head coach in Kane Womack, who's predicated on that defensive side of the ball, making them the attack that they have been. And when you lose 7 starters as well, that's just an area for concern for me. And I think the biggest area of concern, ultimately, to reference back to the JT Crabtree conversation we had was him talking about the leadership of this team being an issue last year. If the leadership of your team was an issue last year and you had one of the most experienced teams in the entire country, I cannot pick you to be at the top 3 of this conference in this division for as competitive as it is when your team is going to be even younger this year and even less talented than it was the year before. So I just had to drop this team very similarly. They disappointed us last year, and I'm expecting at this point of the offseason for them to disappoint us again. And kind of in the same vein of James Madison, I have to drop Troy. I hate it to do it again, but I'm dropping Troy to the 4 spot for myself. I think I have too much respect for what Coach Summerall did in this program. This team, before Coach Summerall came, looked a certain way. Y'all can look up the record and see what this team looked like before he came. And after he leaves, I think it'd be more realistic to expect them to look like that than the team we saw the past 2 years. There's just too many losses on this staff. There's too many losses on this team for all of the reasons that I gave them the award I did when we did superlatives. All of those things are gone. Gunnar Watson, who improved, is gone. You lose key weapons in Kamani Vidal. You lose a ton of guys on the offensive line. This defense was able to keep enough pieces intact to be elite again, but now they're going to have to play some younger players and some more inexperienced players, and they've been absolutely decimated, I think, when you look at the defensive side of the ball, specifically that front. When you look at losing a Jubinor, losing a Solomon, losing a TJ Jackson, I think those are the foundational pieces of the culture of this program. And that culture, along with their head coach, is gone. So I had to put them at the 4 spot. I hated to do it for James Madison and Troy, both of them. But I think there's a lot of parallels. I think when you look in today's college football with coach turnover, the transfer portal, when you have that championship run, I think it's going to be harder to replicate than ever, just given the amount of turnover that we're seeing in today's game of college football. And I just can't put Troy back in that conversation without their head coach. If Coach Summerall alone is back with the roster that they have right now, I'm putting them at the 1 seed, but I just cannot put those same expectations with a completely new staff and an even more decimated roster. So I just had to put Troy at this 4 spot as much as it hurt me.
Yeah, Caden, I definitely see the point. I think I just believe in a couple of these programs' cultures a little bit more. I mean, I think of those 2 programs that maybe you and we are going to disagree on. I believe in Troy's culture a little bit more. I just think that their roster is, has been decimated both through guys going to the draft as well as into the transfer portal. But Let's move on to, the top three here for me. You've got Arkansas State. I've got them at number 3. They are going to be riding momentum. They're coming off of their first bowl trip since 2019, and there's a lot of reasons to be excited. I think that fan base is going to get behind them. I love Jalen Rayner, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it now with TJ Finley gone in a situation that I think Texas State messed up royally. I think Jalen Rayner is the best returning quarterback in the Sun Belt West heading into this year. If he makes that next step, I think he's going to be in contention for another major award this year. Defense is a question for Arkansas State, which didn't allow me to go much higher with them. You're losing Javonte Mackey, which is a big loss. This was, a team that, was the weaker unit last year. Defensively, they've got some young guys who got experience. Can they take another step? I think that's going to be interesting. Okay, and I did go back. The last time Butch Jones was in year 4 to stop at Tennessee, he was 9-4 in year 4. And I think with the more experienced roster, I think 8 wins is not out of the question right now for Arkansas State. Talking Troy, again, we mentioned the run of success, 23-5 over the last 2 seasons. I'm buying into the culture. I bet against them in the preseason last year, and I'm not doing it again here. A lot of offensive losses, like you said, with Watson, Vidal, who was the league's best running back, Barber at wide receiver. That's a lot of elite play on offense that you're losing. But I'm more concerned about this offense than the defense. I think the defense is going to undergo a lot of change, but we've also seen, a ton of talent year in and year out defensively from this unit. So I'm not betting against the defense here. I do like Jared Parker. He's constructed a great staff. Troy is committed to winning. We saw their commitment with the indoor facility. They've done a ton of work in the portal and the high school recruiting. And I'm expecting all that to pay off. They're going to look different, but I think they're going to challenge for a 3rd straight title this season. And Caden, this is where I went a little crazy. I took South Alabama at number 1. And my reason why I am buying into the hype of this offense, Gio Lopez had the huge bowl game. They've got Braylon McReynolds back. He should be healthy. You've got Jamal. You're getting Devin Voisin back from injury. I think that could be an elite duo. Offensive line has a few holes that they're going to have to plug up. The defense, though, that is concerning. I'll give you that. You lose Kane Womack and Corey Batoon on that defensive staff. You're losing guys like Yam Banks, but you're getting back Khalil Jacobs, who JT Crabtree was really high on. You're getting Jaden Voisin back as well. So I still expect this team to be a top 3 to 5 defense in this league. I think leadership quality is a big question mark. Are these guys going to be able to lead this year? And coaching hire drop-off, I just don't think we're going to see much. I'm really excited about Major Applewhite. The players are excited about it. He's offensive-minded, and I'm expecting big things from this team in 2024.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to go in the West, and I think as compared to the East, there's not really many bad picks. I think when you look at kind of our top 5, I disagree with some of the stuff you say, but there's definitely universes where I can close my eyes, and I think both of you and me would agree. We could see probably 5 teams coming out of the West, so I'm definitely excited to see where they go this season. I think with my 3, I had to go with Louisiana. You said they had a low ceiling at the quarterback position, but what they do have is experience, and more experience than any other team below them in my rankings when it comes to the quarterback position. Is the duo of Fields and Wooldridge my favorite in the entire conference? Absolutely not. But these guys have been in big moments before. They've won big games. I really like what Wooldridge was able to bring to the table early in the season, and just historically with his legs, with this offense. This offense is going to be able to run the ball again. It's what they did last year. It's what they'll do again this year. And I think when you look at their defense especially is where I'm really excited. The defense has won the West the last 2 years. And I think when you look at who's bringing back the most on defense, there's not many teams in the West that are bringing back as much as this Louisiana team that played at an absolutely young team last year and still managed to be a top 4 team in the conference when it came to holding teams to yardage per game, top 5 in sacks. They have to stop some explosive plays. That was their biggest issue. And I think with age and another year of experience, they'll be able to show that and limit those explosive plays. And I also think that championship culture is still there. We've talked about culture with a lot of teams. And I do think this team being able to get to 6 wins the last 2 seasons is a testament to their culture, just given the hand they were dealt. I think if things go their way better with health this season, I think the young players are going to double down on their success from the year before. I think this Louisiana team is going to be a sleeper, and I have them being a contender in the West at the 3 spot. At number 2, I had to go with Arkansas State, Noah. They literally only have to fix one thing, and it's the defense, and they'll be just fine. We know how strongly I feel about Jalen Rayner, and you took the words out of my mouth. This is the best quarterback coming back on this side of the conference, and everyone is going to be scared of him coming into his next year. From what he showed as a freshman, if he comes back, I expect the opposite of a sophomore slump and him getting even better next year. And I truly think when you see a guy like a quarterback in Malik Hornsby at Texas State being willing to change positions to play for this quarterback, I think that says a lot about what we think we have at the quarterback position here. And I think if we surround him with more weapons, he'll be just fine. His entire offensive line is coming back, including Jacob Bayer, who we've had on the podcast, first team all-conference center who's going to anchor things up front. I think this offense is going to take a tremendous leap. All this team has to do is fix their defense and they'll be fine. And I think Butch Jones, given his savvy, you mentioned his track record. This is a guy, when it comes to this point of him being at programs, this is usually where you see the turnaround. You mentioned the 9-4 season for Tennessee. This is going to be where they knock on the door, and I think they take that step. All he has to do this offseason is fix that defense, and they're going to be right in the title hunt because of their quarterback and because what they were able to do last year. Jacob Bayer told us this is a team that didn't feel like a losing team before. I think the culture is there. They believe in Butch. Butch believes in them. I think they're going to be a title contender. And for all of the reasons I've been picking these teams, when we talk about coach continuity and specifically quarterback continuity, it's probably weird for me to put Texas State as my number one team. But I think for this Texas State team, it's going to be quarterback plug and play. I do expect them to get somebody in the spring window. They are up here for me because I think they will get a quarterback in the spring window, and he will be able to do similar things that TJ Finley was able to do last year. And I think if you're a quarterback in the transfer portal, why would you not want to play for this offense when you mentioned they have Joey Hobart? You mentioned them having Ishmael Mahdi in the backfield. They're going to be just fine on offense no matter who's playing quarterback for them. I think these are very early rankings, so if some things don't go their way, you'll see this team drop for me. But I do think all they have to do is plug that position, and they're just in a similar situation as Arkansas State. They're just a little bit older, more experienced, and more proven from the year before. They have to just get better on defense, and I really like what I saw from their defense compared to Arkansas State and some other teams that are up here for contenders in the West. They gave up 33 a game, but I love their aggressiveness. They have a bunch of huge players to replace. When you talk about Jordan Revels, you talk about a Holloway who went off in the bowl game. But I think this team winning 8 games last year was beyond impressive. I cannot discount that. Their entire coaching staff is coming back. Their entire offense damn near is coming back. And I think all you have to do is put the right quarterback and the right point guard in the position to take this team back to some success that they've never seen before. So give me Texas State as the top contender and the number one team in the West, expecting them to plug a quarterback in there and him to do well in the next season.
Yeah, Caden, I think if you get a quarterback, like I said, I mean, if TJ Finley was there, this was my number one team in the West heading into the year. I think, if they can get someone here in the spring transfer portal window, I do agree with you. I think it's quarterback plug and play. We saw TJ Finley get there in July, and obviously look at the numbers that he put up. So I think Texas State's a good team, and I agree with you on that Arkansas State pick. I think we both like them heading into this coming year. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode. We hope you all enjoyed the show. Don't forget, we're coming back on Monday. We're launching into our latest series. We're calling it Trending Topics. We're going to be discussing some of the biggest topics affecting the Sun Belt Conference. The series will start with a discussion about the upcoming 12-team college football playoff and how it affects the league. Make sure you join us. That'll do it for us here at the Frary Smith Podcast. Before you go, here's one thing you can do for us. Tell one of your Sunbelt loving friends about the show. Help us make this show bigger than it's ever been. So for Caden Smith, Richmond Weaver, and Brett Jemis, I'm Noah Frary. We really appreciate you spending time with us today. We'll talk to you again on Monday.